Hi all, and thanks again for joining me as I take a look at one of the many issues of the day. I'm Sarah, I'm a millennial, I'm a cynic, and I guess that makes me the Millennial Cynic. Today we're going to have a look at the newest crisis to hit our pockets, and that is the rising cost of living. We all already know the big rising cost, which is housing, both rental and to buy, but now we have costs rising all around for all the other basic necessities of life. Of these new increases, energy costs are the big one and the driving force behind the rest. And to add to the pain, grocery prices are increasing too. A loaf of bread, for example, has risen by 5.3% according to the Irish Consumer Price Index. And of course, wages remain static. So let's have a look at the pattern here. Fuel and gas prices are rising due to international issues around supply, and obviously more so now after Russia's deplorable and ongoing actions in Ukraine, which means they cost more, not just for the average person, but for businesses also. Businesses and haulage firms now have excess costs due to the rising fuel costs, and these costs trickle down the chain all the way to grocery prices. If the truck bringing the bread to the shops is costing more to run, then the bread price must rise to cover the cost, right? I mean, it makes sense, but it doesn't make it any easier to swallow. Not least of all because, of course, some businesses want to keep their profit margin at all costs and have no problem upping their prices instead of, taking that bit of a hit. Week on week, I'm personally finding that my grocery bill is creeping up and up, even though I'm not buying anything new or anything extra. Even the basic own brand ranges are rising, so it's not a simple case of saying to just buy the cheaper variants. Our heating and electricity bills have gone up again in spite of not using more than usual for this time of year. We're not the only household feeling this way, we're managing for now. But for those on lower incomes, it has reached a crisis point. More and more people will be pushed into the poverty zone unless something is done to curtail these rising costs. It's already hard enough to keep a roof over your head, with rents at extortionate levels and house prices skyrocketing, but these extra costs are just putting a huge squeeze on an already squeezed population. And again, wages are static. A paycheck that used to cover the weekly and monthly expenses with a little left over for discretionary items or emergencies is now being left with little to no wiggle room. More and more people will find themselves one illness or car breakdown away from having to make tough choices, especially when the summer is over and the need for home heating rises again. People on the lowest incomes have already been facing those choices. Do I put the heating on for a short burst to take the chill out, or do I get more food this week? Do I pay to fix the car, or pay the electricity bill? Do I pay for the medicine I need, or do I pay the rent? I mean, it might sound like I'm catastrophizing, but honestly, I'm not. And if you think that I am, you should thank your lucky stars you are not that close to the poverty line. And maybe have a rethink about where that poverty line is, because it is a lot higher than people think. There are middle-income families in these positions too. On the outside, looking in, they have a nice home, a nice car, good jobs. But all of these costs add up and are starting to put the squeeze on not only the lower income earners, but also the middle class too. And when mortgage interest rates change in the near future, the pain will be spread even further. So, what's being done to diminish this pain? Well, not much to be honest, at least not much here in Ireland anyway. We're all getting a credit off our electricity bills, and, that's not bad, but it's certainly not great either. There seems to be very little forward thinking by our government, and any forward thinking by the opposition is shot down. What we need right now is real leadership, and not a half-assed job to give people something, anything, so they can say, hey look, we tried. The big ticket items in the package that our government announced are the money off our bill, a reduction in public transport costs, which, is only useful to those in Dublin who have access to it, a one-off increase in fuel allowance for those on certain welfare payments, and a temporary decrease in the limit for the drugs payment scheme. The cynic in me finds it hard to believe that this is all they could brainstorm. The bigger cynic in me finds it hard to shake the feeling that we are facing into this by design, as a way of forcing austerity by any other name. Let's face it, the government spending was high during the past 2 years of pandemic life. So on the one hand, you'd be forgiven for thinking that, well, maybe they have to recoup those costs, and a stealth austerity is a good way to go about it. However, that's at odds with record-breaking tax receipts last year, showing an economy that has rebounded remarkably well after lockdown life, with both income tax and VAT receipts higher than anticipated. So if the economy is doing well, then why can't the government offer far more to combat these increases in the cost of living? Well, we've already seen from the housing crisis that they just can't be bothered really. Instead, relying on foreign investment and vulture funds to prop up a broken rental market because, otherwise they'd actually have to do things that cost money. And we can't be seen to be spending money on fixing our problems now, can we? Not when our national debt is still so high. But seriously, there are steps that can be taken right now to offset the rising cost of living. A reduction in VAT on groceries would be a good start. If it can be done to help a struggling hospitality sector, then yeah, it can be done for the common people. The government here were even forced to lower the excise duty on fuel after both the diesel and petrol reached €2 a litre back in March. But who knows when that reduction will be done away with. Oh, it has already been done away with, naturally. As of right now, prices at the pumps are in and around €2 again. Yay! Now, I've mentioned Russia and their disgraceful actions in Ukraine. Obviously, this is having a knock-on effect across Europe when it comes to fuel, and especially natural gas. Now, look, it would be ridiculous to moan about any price increases due to the economic sanctions placed on Russia, when this is clearly the right thing to be doing. And all you have to do is turn on the news to see how much worse the Ukrainian people have it than we do. However, serious questions need to be asked of many countries as to why we are so reliant on Russia for our fuel supply. I mean, they haven't exactly been hiding how questionable they are, what with the many poisonings and suicides of the outspoken critics and opposition of Putin and his government over the last few decades. Why haven't we been future-proofing ourselves and looking at ways and means to become independent from Russian supply? Big questions, obviously, with, I'm sure, many layered and various reasons why we have done next to nothing. Now look, I'm not here claiming to be an expert. In fact, my expertise on anything would be quite limited if I'm being honest. I am just an ordinary everyday citizen looking at the events in the world and seeing the obvious problems. Finding answers is, well, you know what, it's well above my pay grade. But not having a solution shouldn't mean that I can't point out the bloody obvious that every other Joe and Joanne soap can see. And if ordinary people are seeing problems and seeing obvious questionable activities, then surely someone in power has seen them too, no? And maybe, use their position to try and solve the issue? Like they're paid to do? Like many issues both here in Ireland and around the world, we've sat back and watched problems come at us without trying to stop them before they really cause issues. Climate change, I'm looking at you here. And unfortunately, the belated efforts to curb climate change will also bring more pain to the ordinary people, what with carbon tax being introduced very soon, despite the calls from opposition to delay it due to the blatantly obvious reason of more tax equals more hardship when the cost of living is already rising. Now look, I absolutely do believe we need to do more to tackle climate change. I mean, it's in our best interest as a species to do what needs to be done. But there has to be a better way than just taxing ordinary people. You cannot have all stick and no carrot. You can't say we need to move away from fossil fuels, tax them to high heaven, but offer no viable alternative. We do have electric cars and it would be a good idea to move to that as the norm, although questions must also be asked about how we are generating the electricity to charge these cars when 40 to 50% of our electricity generation comes from natural gas. Either way, they're currently still too expensive. Sure, many can afford new cars by constantly upgrading while availing of the likes of PCP credit, but a lot of people just buy second-hand cars, conscious of buying one that won't crucify you on the road tax, and will do what you can to keep it running for as long as possible. Until we get to a point where electric cars are more affordable for the average person, then they are not a viable alternative, and beating people over the head with carbon tax for daring to drive a gas guzzler because they can't afford an electric car is really not the way to go about things. Doubly so when you consider that our road tax already charges more for cars that have higher emissions. It's the same with home heating. You can't tax gas and oil into oblivion when there are no other accessible ways to heat your home. When the exaggerated verses from Taxman by the Beatles become reality, you know you're in trouble. Stop targeting ordinary people with carbon tax and actually move towards the bigger culprits instead. I cannot be held responsible for making choices based on value for money over eco-friendly. If I had more money, I'd be able to be more eco-conscious. But I don't, so I can't. And that's the reality of the vast majority of the working world. And if eco-friendly was better value for money, then we would all avail of it. And this is the big thing that needs to be hammered home to the government, and especially the Green Party. You cannot make eco-friendly more affordable by pricing the alternatives higher than affordable. Making something cost more does not make the alternatives any cheaper. It just makes everything more expensive, which punishes those on lower incomes simply for being poorer than others. It is a tax on living, simple as that. But unfortunately, the Green Party in particular don't really seem to care about people on lower incomes, or rural Ireland, or people with cars, or families, or people in general really. All they seem to care about is pushing their green initiatives, and to hell with the cost for ordinary people. Because, obviously, it's only ordinary people causing climate change and not, all the flights or factories or the big countries that are not doing their fair share. No, just the little people. You might think I'm exaggerating, but a quick look at how Eamon Ryan and his Green Party would have us solve our own cost of living crisis tells you everything you need to know about them and what they think of ordinary people. He has told us to take shorter showers. Now, for most people, and especially parents, having a shower is a little tiny break away from the stresses of the world and your kids. So it's nearly a mental health break for some people. And I don't think people are really showering to excess anyway, that this would need to be said to grown adults. He's also suggested to drive less. Fuck you, rural Ireland. Unbelievable. He also had the gall to tell people to cut down on the energy use during the peak times of 5 p.m. to 7 p.m, while saying, and I quote, "That saves consumers money. It reduces the amount of gas that we buy from the market and therefore revenues going to the Russian government." End quote. So, if you use energy during those times of the day to, cook dinner for your family, guess what? You're now supporting Putin. I mean, obviously I'm being deliberately on the nose here, but I mean, come on. He's bemoaning that we are buying gas from Russia and telling ordinary people it's our own fault for using energy when we do. Bollocks to that. As I said before, Russia are not a new issue. What they are doing now is new, granted, but they've always been pushing boundaries. So why are we so indebted to them when it comes to our energy supply? Because that's not something I signed up for. That's something short-sighted governments signed up for. You lie down with dogs and you get fleas and all that. But yet, once again, it's ordinary people paying the price for governments turning a blind eye to dodgy behaviour just so they don't have to do anything themselves. Because it's easier to buy gas from Russia than to figure out how to become self-sufficient. Honestly, the Greens really must not want to be re-elected. There may not be a way to fix all of our problems with affordability instantly, but there are many things that could be done to help alleviate the stressors from ordinary working people. lower VAT on groceries and energy bills, stop the implementation of carbon tax until things have calmed down, implement a livable wage. We are supposed to be a society living in a country. We are not just an economy. And that means sometimes putting the economy to the side in order to heal society first. If we can do it for businesses, which we have shown we can do during the pandemic, then we can do it for ordinary people. It's as simple as that. Anyway, thanks for joining me today, and I hope to be back soon with more thoughts about other areas of modern life. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel for more from me. And let me know what you think in the comments or on Twitter. I'm eager to hear other views and maybe some solutions to this crisis. Thanks again for listening, guys. See you soon. Slán go fóill.